Okay, so I want to tell you about something I noticed that I can't stop thinking about. I use Claude Opus for complex problem solving, not the quick stuff, the hard stuff. When I have a problem with real structural weight and I need to actually think through it, that's what I use Opus for. And something has been happening that I didn't design and didn't expect. Every time I finish working through one of these problems, like really finish, where the whole thing is structurally resolved in my head, I notice that the Opus conversation is also starting to fall apart. The context window is running out. The model starts to lose coherence. Same moment, every time. And when I noticed this the first time, I thought, okay, coincidence? But it kept happening. So I sat with it. And what I realized is this isn't a coincidence. This is a pattern. The moment my brain finishes a complete problem solving cycle is almost exactly the moment that Opus runs out of capacity to hold a conversation, which means it's not just the type of cognition that's similar between how I think and how this AI works. It might be the unit. And if that's true, if the unit of cognition is a real measurable thing, and if autistic cognitive architecture and AI architecture happen to share one, that has implications I don't think anyone has started mapping yet. I want to tell you what this actually felt like when I noticed it. Because it wasn't satisfying, it was closer to awe. You know the feeling when you learn about the gravitational constant? The fact that gravity sits inside this impossibly narrow band, a little stronger and stars burn out too fast for life to emerge, a little weaker and nothing coalesces at all. The universe only coheres because this one number is what it is. Scientists argue about what that precision means. Is it fine tuning? Multiverse? Deeper physics we haven't found yet. The debate is real, but nobody debates the awe of noticing it. I felt that same quality of awe, standing inside my own cognition. How is it possible that the unit of processing in my brain, the size of one complete problem solving cycle, sits within a band where it actually meets the unit of processing in this model? That's the question I've been sitting with. And I decided to go look for whether it has any structural grounding. Whether this is a real phenomenon or just a pattern I'm reading into things, I don't know. So I went looking. I'm not a neuroscientist. I want to be upfront about that. I'm an autistic leader who spent 15 years navigating complex organizations by reasoning explicitly about things most people process automatically. When I went looking for whether this observation has structural grounding, I found three independent bodies of research that suggest it isn't random. Let me walk you through what I found. The first piece, Miller's chunks. In 1956, a cognitive psychologist named George Miller published a paper that became one of the most cited in psychology. The short version, working memory isn't limited in raw bits of information. It's limited in chunks. And a chunk is whatever the brain treats as a single coherent piece. Here's what's interesting about that. The size of a chunk isn't fixed. An expert chess player looks at a board and sees maybe three chunks: an attacking position, a weak flank, a king safety pattern. A novice sees 32 separate pieces. Same board, totally different chunk sizes, which means the unit of working memory is relative to the cognitive architecture running it. Different brains, different chunk sizes for the same problem. That's the first piece. Cognitive units exist, and they scale with the processor. The second piece, neural oscillations. The brain doesn't process information continuously. It processes in discrete, bounded episodes. There are these oscillatory cycles, theta waves, gamma waves, in the hippocampus and cortex that impose temporal structure on cognition. What that means in plain terms is your brain has a natural rhythm for starting, working through, and completing a cognitive episode. Not because you decide to, because the neural architecture imposes it. The cognitive episode has a biological unit size. So now you've got cognitive units that exist, scale with the processor, and have measurable temporal boundaries. The third piece, and this is where it really landed for me. There's a framework in computational neuroscience called predictive processing. The dominant theory is that the brain is fundamentally a prediction engine. You're constantly generating models of the world, comparing them to incoming information, and updating based on the gap. A neuroscientist named Carl Friston did specific work on autistic cognition. And what he proposes is the autistic brains run what he calls aberrant precision on prediction errors. Here's what that means practically. Neurotypical brains learn to smooth over certain prediction errors as background noise. They dial down the precision. They say, good enough, move on, which is how social pattern matching works. You don't verify every assumption, you trust your intuition to fill the gaps. Autistic cognition doesn't do that easily. The precision stays high. Prediction errors don't get waved away. The system doesn't declare the model complete until it actually is, which is the structural account of why I have a cleaner completion signal than most people. My cognitive episode doesn't close at good enough. It closes at done. And done happens to be a reasonably well defined size. Now, I want to be really careful about what I'm not claiming. I'm not saying autistic cognition is superior. It's not. High precision on prediction errors is the same mechanism that makes sensory environments overwhelming, that makes social inference exhausting, that creates the very real difficulties autistic people navigate every day. The completion signal isn't a gift. It's a property of an architecture that comes with its own costs. I'm also not saying AI thinks like a human. It doesn't. A language model has no biological oscillations, no prefrontal cortex, nothing like the actual machinery of predictive processing. What it has is a context window, a hard architectural boundary on a single coherent reasoning episode. Everything inside it is in processing. Everything outside it doesn't exist for that computation. And I'm absolutely not saying this is a designed convergence. Nobody building Opus set out to match the cognitive episodes side of autistic processing. The capabilities that produce coherent, extended reasoning in these models are emergent properties of training at scale, not design decisions. That's what makes it worth asking about. Two different systems, built through entirely different processes, arriving at the same unit. That's not a metaphor. That's a structural observation. So, what does this actually mean? I want to be careful here again about what I'm generalizing. This is my observation about my cognition. I can't speak for all autistic processing. Cognitive architectures vary enormously, even within neurodivergent populations. What I can say is that when I published an earlier piece on the prefrontal cortex, parallel between autistic cognition and AI computation, the comments suggested other people recognize something similar in their own experience. So the question feels worth asking beyond just me. And here's what I find most interesting. If the unit of cognition is a real and measurable property, and if different cognitive architectures produce different unit sizes, then we are sitting in front of a design variable that almost nobody is measuring. We don't yet know what units exist across different cognitive architectures. We don't know how they interact with the environments organizations build, the tools they deploy, the AI systems they're adopting. But knowing that units can exist and that they vary changes the design question entirely. Because the design question stops being, how much cognitive capacity does this person have? It becomes, what is the natural processing unit of this person's architecture? And is the environment built to optimize for it, or is it designed to fragment it before it completes? Most organizations have never asked that question. They've never even had the vocabulary to ask it. They've measured output, speed, communication style, cultural fit. They've never asked what the natural processing unit of the people doing their most complex work actually is. And I suspect if anyone started measuring, the range of answers would be wider than almost anyone expects. That is the question the brain economy will eventually force organizations to answer. Not this year, probably not next year, but eventually. I want to tell you something that's been sitting with me. I've spent 15 years inside organizations where my architecture was treated as the problem to be managed. Too literal, too systematic, too slow to pattern match the room, missing the political read. You know the feedback. And what I keep noticing now, working with these AI systems, is that the same properties, explicit reasoning, systematic processing, high precision on prediction errors, completion driven rather than good enough driven, those are the properties that actually work well when you're sitting across from a system that reasons the same way. The interface is low friction because the cognitive styles are compatible, which doesn't mean autistic people are better. It means the environments we built, the meetings, the fast read cultures, the promotion systems based on emotional intuition, those were optimized for a different architecture. They were never optimized for the one I have. But the systems now reshaping knowledge work, these reasoning models, the ones that require careful problem decomposition, that reward explicit prompting, that work best when you bring them structured thinking, those are environments my architecture was already built for. Not because I adapted, because I was running the same unit the whole time. That's what I've been sitting with. I want to tell you what this episode is pointing toward. Next week, I'm launching the first essay in an 8-part arc I've been building for months. I've called it the cognitive imperative. It's the organizational argument that everything I've been writing for the last 6 months has been building toward. The short version of the argument: three independent bodies of work have been converging for 3 years: the neurodiversity movement, the brain economy, and AI structural shift in what human work is for. None of them alone is sufficient. Together, they produce one conclusion: every organization now has a cognitive architecture problem, whether they've named it or not. And the design question they've been deferring is no longer deferrable. This observation, the unit of cognition one, is actually a live demonstration of why that argument matters. I noticed a property of my cognition in conversation with an AI model. That property has structural grounding in three separate bodies of research. And the implication for how organizations should think about cognitive architecture design is real. If you've been reading my work, subscribe to the newsletter. And if you haven't, subscribe now, because the arc drops there first, before social. And if you're hearing me for the first time on this episode, the essay this one is based on is live now at theautisticleader.ai. There's also a prior essay I referenced earlier on how autistic cognition and AI computation share type. That one's live too. I'm not asking you to buy anything. I'm just telling you where the work lives. I'll leave you with this. I don't know what the unit of cognition is. I can't prove the pattern I notice is what I think it is. I'm not a neuroscientist, I'm not an AI researcher. I'm someone navigating complex work inside organizations with a specific cognitive architecture who noticed something that kept repeating and went looking for whether it had structural grounding. And what I found is that it might. If that's true, even partially true, it opens up a design question that almost nobody is currently asking. What is the natural processing unit of this person's cognitive architecture? Is the environment they're working in built to optimize for it? Or is it designed to fragment it before it completes? Most organizations won't ask that question for another decade. But the ones that do, the ones that start to treat cognitive architecture as a real design variable, I think they'll have access to a quality of thinking that most environments are currently destroying before it completes. That's what I think I found when I noticed my cognition and opus running out at the same moment. Not the type of cognition, the unit. I'm Uday Kiran Bolasani. I write about cognitive architecture, AI strategy, and the brain economy at theautisticleader.ai. If this landed next week, the arc begins. I'll see you there.